here, and I will pass it over. I'm actually going to, you'll see the camera jiggle a little bit because I'm going to move things over a little bit so that you can see the important people here. Excellent.
Hello, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. We're great to be here with you today. And I noticed that on the list of that there were several familiar names to me and some not so familiar. So we thought we would try and provide a balance today between some new information coming out of our guidance service here in Ottawa and also just some general information in terms of our mandate and the overview and the population we're serving and those kinds of things for those of you who may be new to finding out about our guidance service. So first off, and one of the more important things I'd like to do is introduce you to my new co-counselor, Elisa Hanrahan. And Elisa joins us here in Ottawa with a wealth of experience in the education field and also working with families and conducting equivalencies for children who have moved recently to Canada or have moved province to province and that sort of thing. So we're thrilled to have her with us. She does come in behind Carole Coulon, and so she will be assuming the same alphabet, which we'll reiterate again at the end of the presentation for future contacts when you're referring families to us. So in terms of our agenda for today, we'd like to give you, again, some general information about our service and who we support. We'd like to talk a little bit about particularities about the OUTCAN versus INCAN and the types of needs that we're seeing and serving. And then we have put together a few slides on some more hot-button topics that have come up and that seem to be sort of reoccurring themes currently. And that would include the UK curriculum, information about homeschooling, tutoring, special needs, and junior kindergarten, as well as French immersion.
Okay, so if you take a look at the graphics here, this graphic really shows in a nutshell what the guidance counseling program at CEM is all about. You can see that we have three overarching aims. One is to contribute to the overall Canadian military. One is to offer support to members when they are navigating educational transitions, and that can be INCAN or OUTCAN. And finally, it's to provide information and educational tools on a variety of topics. So we'll just move to the next slide. Okay. So as guidance counselors, we do lots of different things. We deliver counseling to members and their spouses both over the phone and via email. And this counseling can be wide in terms of the topics, and you'll learn more about some of the topics later on in our presentation. We will also liaise with the child's guidance counselor or principal at post if that is required. We will assess when a dependent might require distance learning, e-learning, or tutoring, and make those recommendations to a family. And then we simply address other needs as they arise, as they pertain to a child's journey through the education system, both here and outside of Canada, and we make various referrals. Next one. Just bear with me for a second. Okay. So we have a couple of graphics to show you, which will give you a better visual sense in terms of who we deal with here at CEM. Over the course of a year, we do all sorts of screenings with families. And these are families who are going to be going OUTCAN. And if you take a look at our pie chart, you'll see that over the course of last year, for example, we held 552 individual educational screenings. What that means is we assessed the needs of 552 dependents from the age of babyhood, toddlerhood, right up until the age of 23. And we assessed their educational needs in terms of pathway programming and spoke with their families, their parents, about what that sort of pathway might look like. If we break it down, those 552 dependents break down into roughly 74% school-age dependents. That means anywhere from JK to grade 12. And then if you look at the two smaller pieces on the pie chart, 13% of the dependents that we screened last year were under the JK age, so 0 to 3 years old, and then another 13% of those dependents finished high school and were in post-secondary institutions. And another chart to help you understand visually what it is that we're all about. You can see that this is an enormous pie piece that is blue. What this means is the vast majority of the families that we screened, the 278 families last year, had successful screenings. That means that they screened green and were able to continue to their OUTCAN posting. Very few families are not able to do so. You'll see that there's a small sliver of the pie. About 1% of the screenings may result in a red screening due to various factors, and then about 1% of the families that screen cancel the screening and do not continue to post for other reasons. But as you can see, 98% of our screenings result in a green screening. I'm just going to move the camera over a little bit.
Okay. So in terms of some of the considerations and information that we wanted to make you aware of, some new developments, we are now officially a part of the new VCDS OUTCAN screening form, which is a new development. The form is not in use just yet. They're looking to have the translation completed before it gets circulated and put into use. We anticipate, though we've started the screening process already for the upcoming APS with a handful of screenings, we do anticipate it being in use very shortly. And what that means is that we are now officially one of the pillars on that form, in addition to the social work and medical, etc. So that is helpful in that occasionally it has happened, not often, but we want to ensure that families don't end up at post without having gone through the educational portion of the screening. So that will be useful to that end. Also, we have redone our own educational screening questionnaire, which is due to be posted imminently on our website, along with the new administration instructions that accompany the form and new FAQs. So all of those are also in translation, and we are waiting to post those anytime now. You can look for that on our portion of the CAS Connection website under Children's Education Management, which would be great. Something to share with you, when is it necessary for families to screen? It would be helpful for families to know, and we do go over this during the screening process. However, sometimes they have a change of circumstance while at post, and it's important for them to understand that if their choice of education for their children, for whatever reason, changes while they're at post, that does necessitate a re-screening educationally. An example of that would be a family arrives to post and they're accessing public education, and then they decide, for example, that they would prefer to homeschool their child. Homeschooling is a separate screening process in education, as is public education, fee-paying school, remaining in Canada, etc. So if there's a change in educational circumstance, it would necessitate a re-screening. In addition to that, other times where we might see it necessary for a re-screening would be if the family opts to have their child access education back in Canada while they remain at post. So that would also be an educational re-screening. We do see this from time to time. In terms of the service we provide, we really aim to offer a cradle-to-grave or an exit-to-reentry plan for education for dependents of our CAF families. So we will plan with the members an educational pathway for their children while they are at post, and also we are here as a support throughout their posting, as well as when they're preparing to come back into Canada. And when they arrive back into Canada, that first year is often a time, and we're seeing that we're receiving a lot more contact from families. Now that we've been in operation for a number of years, we have that full cycle that's occurring, which is excellent to see. We have families contacting us through each of those stages I just mentioned. There has, as you may have heard from families that you're working with, there's been a cyclical review of the Foreign Service Directives, and that has resulted in some changes to benefits, some for the positive, some more controversial, depending on the age and stage of your child. So we have now increased official second language tutoring benefits at the younger ages, so children are entitled to official second language tutoring, the 50 hours per year at post, beginning in junior kindergarten, which is a nice development. However, there have been changes, for example, to the shelter allowance for post-secondary students, and so we continue to advise families as we're screening them of these changes, and all of the new changes to the Foreign Service Directives are, of course, posted on our website as well as Treasury Board. So some of the obstacles that we assist families with, we look at the gaps in learning that sometimes occur because of the mobility in their children's education. We have sometimes issues with varying school start ages from post to post. That typically is an issue, and Elisa will explain a little bit further on how this affects families trying to access junior kindergarten equivalent programming outside of Canada. Academic readiness for a new system, and that applies to both INCAN and OUTCAN. Sometimes we're seeing that families are really looking for support if they're moving province to province, as well as the INCAN and OUTCAN. And then need for prerequisite courses, which we can sometimes mitigate by helping out and providing access to distance learning courses that may assist with that and assist a student remaining in their stream of study. Okay. Move to the next step. So in terms of INCAN, as I mentioned, the gaps in learning, so we do have tutoring provisions that are applicable for INCAN. One of the stipulations that we think is important to restate when working with families, because we tend to get a lot of calls from INCAN families, and often they haven't moved provinces. So if they are looking for tutoring support, which is a common one, and often we get referrals from people either through MFRCs or otherwise to us. An important thing to consider is that the tutoring is only available if it's a change in curriculum that is involved, so that means province to province. An Ottawa to Kingston move, for example, would not apply for the tutoring support from us through CEM. However, we always try and provide families with information and other places where they can look for sources of funding and or support for their children. Pathway planning, as I mentioned, is ongoing in CAN, and we look at supporting students all the way through, so moving province to province particularly is a challenge once they are at the grade 11 level and they have the option of remaining in their current province, and so we help as best as possible to orchestrate that for the families if they are able to withstand the family separation. Special needs funding and support. We get a lot of requests about this. Often with regards to the funding piece, it has to do with the psychoeducational assessment and looking for supports that way. Again, we don't have funding through CEM for that purpose, but we always try and, given the nature of the needs and the age and stage of the student, we try and always leave families with some sort of information and support to help them access those needs through other means. Tutoring upon return from OUTCAN is also widely known now because we've been screening now for a number of years. So we give this information up front to families when they're screening to go outside of the country. They will already know in preparation well in advance that they are entitled to apply for that tutoring benefit in the first year upon return to Canada. So that we've seen an increase in requests for that. That is also a time-sensitive request, so it's only applicable in the first year. So we'd like to remind families about that both ways. Okay, so one of our hot topics, UK curriculum. That, since I arrived here at CEM 5 years ago, it was a hot topic then. It still remains to be so now. Right now, families are, when we screen them, they are told and they know that Working Group B has declared that the UK curriculum is not compatible beyond grade 8. And so the reality about that is that we have some posting locations that actually do not offer curriculum other than UK past grade 8, and so there can be an impact. We have tried to educate and spread this word as widely as possible in advance of the screenings so that families can take that into consideration. We do have families that feel that they can withstand the family separation, and so there are some alternative possibilities, which would include boarding school here back in Canada, or possibly the closest Ontario curriculum or Canadian curriculum school at post if they're over in Europe. And so we have situations that, for example, in Turkey is an example where we had a family posted to Izmir, and the schooling there didn't offer anything other than UK curriculum beyond grade 8, and the family did opt then to continue on with the screening and the posting, and their children attend a school offering Ontario curriculum. Of course, outside of Greater London, this is where we're seeing the biggest issue with screenings coming in, and so we're really working with families as early on in the process as possible to advise them of this, to troubleshoot any possible scenarios that they would see as being viable for their family, and if not, then hopefully they have the opportunity to go back and liaise with their career manager to look at whether or not there are other feasible posting locations for them for this current APS. We've had some families who've opted to wait until to pull out of the screening process and then reapply the following year, for example. Any questions thus far from anyone online here?
So feel free to write in the chat as well. If you're having issues with your telephone, or if you've got lots of background noise where you are.
Well, I'm going to continue with a bit of an overview of some more hot topics, or what are emerging as hot topics, just for your general information. Andrea alluded to the fact that homeschooling is becoming a bigger topic for us to deal with now. Families may decide that homeschooling is the best option when they are at post, because they are maybe moving to an area where the curriculum differences are significant, and it just seems like it would work best for their family. This happens, we're seeing more frequently with postings to the U.S., which is not surprising because there are greater numbers of parents in the U.S. who homeschool, and there are homeschooling communities, both in terms of physical communities and virtual communities that are developing in the U.S., where teaching supports are shared between homeschool and parents. Families who would like to homeschool, however, it's a reminder that if they would like to do so, this is a separate and additional rescreening process if the family is already at post, because we have to look at lots of different factors when we talk about homeschooling with a family. And it's a little reminder at this point, too, that if you have, you notice that you're dealing with families who have questions with regards to any of these hot topics, please feel free to refer them directly to us here at CEM. We'll be very happy to speak with them. Another hot topic we're finding we're dealing with more frequently is the idea of junior kindergarten. When families go OUTCAN, they are eligible to receive all the benefits that a child or a youth would access in Ontario. And in Ontario, junior kindergarten is available 5 days a week, full-time, to all children who are 4 years of age by December 31st. This poses some interesting situations for us. Junior kindergarten is not offered at all posts. It's not offered in a consistent way across Canada, certainly not offered in a consistent way across the U.S., for example. And so what it means is families who are at post and their children are eligible for JK equivalent programming, what it means is often we have to work quite closely with the families in terms of helping them understand what a scenario might look like for their child. This happens with an approval process that goes through a working group B. Once again, something that we go over with the family. Just to give you a quick illustration of how this can look quite different, a child, I screened a family yesterday, a child living here in Ottawa whose birthday is December 29th. So what that means is here in Ottawa, he's a squeaker, and he would be able to access JK in the year that he turns 4 by virtue of the fact that he turned 4 2 days before the cutoff. And he's going OUTCAN, he's going to the U.S. However, cutoff dates for schools tend to be much earlier in the U.S. So what it means is his first year at post, he will be eligible for private JK-like programming because he is eligible for that in Ontario. His second year at post, he will be eligible for that entire thing again, so a second year of JK, because he will come of age, so to speak, only the second year of post, according to the U.S. Cutoff date, which means that when he does return to Canada, he'll be placed in an age-appropriate placement in a Canadian school, but it's going to kind of be like he has to skip a grade. This can be complicated, and once again, it's a good example of a scenario where some counselors work very closely with a family to mitigate all of the obstacles that might come in the way of a child.
Okay, special education. We do, as I mentioned, get a number of requests from families looking for special education support inside of Canada, particularly related to funding in this case, because they are able to access it. It becomes the school programming responsibility. However, for the testing and the wait list, those can sometimes be issues. So we do often refer families to other sources such as Support Our Troops, where they may qualify for some yearly funding, bursaries, that sort of thing. In terms of OUTCAN, if we look at SHAPE and AFNOR schools, for example, our CAP overseas schools, we do now offer limited special needs. So whether it be at one of our schools or elsewhere outside of Canada, when a family is screening with a child with special needs, we do require, as part of the screening process, verifications from the school. It generally comes through the principal or the school board, whatever the case may be, that they would be able to meet the needs of the learning needs of the child. And that is a key piece of our screening, and we often are involved in liaising with the family over this and possibly the school or school board at post in order to ensure that the needs of the child can be met while outside the country. Let me see. There is, under the Foreign Service Directive, number 34.9, which can provide for additional supports and monetary supports if deemed needed by the receiving school, and that is a working group B process. So there's a process which takes a little bit of time. Sometimes these screenings can be during an already very busy and complicated process, seem to slow it down a little bit, but we work as closely as we can with the families to ensure that they feel supported through this part of the process. And just in finishing my last thought about that last slide, one of the reasons why families with special needs tend to really favor the U.S. as a posting location is because we do find the families feel quite supported within the public system there, and it tends to provide them with an ease of transition and also, some would say, even greater support than what they find their children often receiving back here in Canada.
Okay, so just a couple more hot topics to touch upon with you before we wrap things up with you, and a reminder that we're happy to take any questions that you might have. You may find that families come to you with inquiries about tutoring. And the fact is that there are lots of different sorts of tutoring that a dependent might be eligible to access. If I were to use math as an example, that's something that might help you understand what tutoring might look like for a dependent. We offer, for example, tutoring or e-learning prior to post. If we think about math as the context, let's say a student is moving from Canada to another country where we're anticipating a change in curriculum with regards to math. Then we might want to look at, for example, an e-learning course or some tutoring prior to going into the new curricular situation. We also offer tutoring in a subject at post during that first year. So let's say that our student has moved into a new system in the U.S., and what we're finding is there's a real difference in terms of the way that the math curriculum is taught. Once again, that would be a good reason to access tutoring in a subject for that dependent. Again, tutoring in a subject upon return from post. Let's say that our student is now returning back to Canada. The math is being taught in a completely different way again. Once again, that child, that youth could access tutoring in a subject to help mitigate the differences in terms of the curriculum. And finally, we offer tutoring for all students who are posted OUTCAN, tutoring in their second official language, be it ESL or FSL. They can access that every year that they are on an OUTCAN posting. And just a little reminder that when it comes to tutors, OUTCAN versus INCAN, and you might find that this has an effect with regards to families you work with because they may request some help in terms of finding tutors. Tutors who are providing support INCAN have to be certified teachers. This is not the case when we're finding tutors OUTCAN because obviously that's a much more difficult thing to regulate.
I'm on the phone.
Okay, French immersion. This continues to be sort of a source of controversy, shall we say. What we're finding in terms of French immersion in CAN, we do hear and understand that there's a disparity between the level of French depending upon the province and sometimes even within the province. And so often when families are asking for support in the form of tutoring, again, there has to be a curriculum change. So if they're moving from province to province, it's something we could look at. But in addition to that, French immersion, they're very clear in the compensation and benefits instructions that access to French immersion is not a constitutional right. And so what we encourage families to do is, if they're looking for support for their child for French, is that they look to seek tutoring in French as a subject and see if we can access it for them that way. And so we always provide information as to the type of wording that the principal could use to provide the support letter, and it's very specific. So two things to keep in mind for tutoring. It needs to be subject specific when it comes to immersion. It has to be for French, and it has to, the principal must indicate that the child is disadvantaged due to the change in curriculum and not due to their learning profile. Okay, and so those are two important distinctions to make. French immersion, as we know, is not offered at most of the OUTCAN posting locations. There are a few exceptions. We have some public French immersion programs offered in the Washington, D.C., Maryland, Virginia sort of area. It's difficult to access at times, so that can be a possibility. And we also know that Working Group B has recently approved access to fee-paying schools such as Washington International School, and Lycée Rochambeau is now also offering a French immersion program. And Working Group B had approved it based on continuation of streams. So they're working under the Foreign Service Directives and using that wording, and we've learned that that has occurred. And so that may be of interest to some of your families. In addition, another thing about French immersion that's important to note, we have families when we're in the screening process that will look to the lycée schooling as an option for their children because they feel it's the most compatible with the French immersion, which in fact is actually not the case. So French immersion is considered an English program, and the lycée school system would not be an appropriate choice, and they would not be screened for that. And you know, it can be a source of disappointment for families who are really keen on having their child remain in an French immersion schooling setting, and that is one of the drawbacks with OUTCAN, that it's just not always available at post, and therefore those 50 hours we try to use substitute and help with a little bit of the official second language learning. Okay, and we're trying to stay, we're running over a little bit, but we're trying to stay close to time. We thank you for all of the referrals that you continue to send our way. We appreciate working with the families that you send on to us because, and as Elisa has learned this early on already, working with military families is really a case-by-case basis. So unlike a school setting where we work with cohorts of students who have similar programs in a similar curriculum and move from year to year at a similar pace, it's just not that way with the families that we work with here. And so when you are working with families, we would encourage you to have them contact us directly, and then we can really get into the details of what we think would apply to their individual and specific unique circumstances. So we have our contact information there for you. Our Plus box is a great way to send emails to our department, and we look forward to continuing to help you serve our families. Thanks for listening today.
Thank you.
All right, so thank you very much to Andrea and Elisa. I won't, we'll actually, what we'll do is try to stay on time because I know that you guys probably have other stuff to get to. But if you do have some burning questions, feel free to either reach out to the guidance counselors directly, fire me off an email with the questions. We can always do a follow-up session or some follow-up Q&As afterwards, just so that we don't blur into the meeting times for other individuals. And I realize that Elisa and Andrea probably have some stuff to get to as well. So thank you very much, folks, for joining us today, and we'll see you at the next WebXchange.